So good morning to the Caron YouTube audience, and again, good morning to those of you who are here with me, and also anybody on campus who's watching on live stream. I'm grateful to be here. I thought I would start with the recollection of a Sunday that must have happened around February or March of 2008. I was a brand new employee at Caron, and I started in mid-January. I'd been recruited by the famous Father Bill Helberg, and the intention of my employment was eventually to take over as the lead chaplain at this historic Magic Mountain site. And part of that meant that I would have the privilege and pleasure of working alongside Father Bill every Sunday here in the Caron Chapel service. So it's just kind of finding my way through the Caron Chapel service, and I'd been to 3 or 4 chapel services, and I thought I had the whole thing figured out. And this particular morning I came in and met Father Bill in the I call it the sacristy, but it's just a closet. And Father Bill asked me if I had heard what happened, and I had not been here for the preceding couple of days, although he lived on campus, so he was very plugged into a lot of things that would occur both within the patient community and at a larger level. And what had happened was that an alumni of recent tenure on campus, at a time when we had had 4-month-long stays on this campus, had left a few weeks before and had taken his life. So there were still patients here who remembered this fellow, and the news of the death had come in through the patient community, not through clinical or news media. And it had really shaken up our men's extended care unit, this long stay unit on this campus. And it had shaken up Father Bill, and I remembered the patient, Father Bill remembered the patient, and there were a number of people in the audience that day who had direct interaction with this fellow. And so in the need to come to this space, informed by that loss, Father Bill announced to me before the service that he was going to orient the theme of the service entirely towards loss. And at that time, chapel service did not normally have themes. It does today. But this was the first time I'd seen Bill announce that there would be a particular thrust to the service. And he did a couple of things that I remember very well. One was he polled the audience. He asked for people to raise their hands. I won't do that to you today, but it's kind of because I know how it works. So my guess is if you raise your hands, that if I were to ask how many of you have somebody in fairly close proximity to you that you're aware of that had died as a result of addiction, the numbers would be pretty high. And I don't know how you can exist in this world today and not be 1 or 2 degrees of separation from such a death. And these deaths occur not only from overdose, but from suicide and from vehicular events and, just miserable wastings away. It's a very real phenomenon that colors some people's arrival here, and I think is appropriate to have in mind. Later in the regular weekly prayers that we have, we call to mind those who have lost to the disease of addiction, and so it has its place every Sunday, but that's the thrust of this particular Sunday's service, and I know you're excited to hear about loss. Not really, right? It's a tragic thing, but there's a value in touching this particular base. And all of my other chapel themes, I would think, are oriented towards hope and exuberance. I would say to you, my hope is that this particular chapel service ends up orienting itself that way. But to get there, I want to start with pain. So, and if I were to cut right to the end, I would say that what Father Bill's wisdom was on that particular day was that, and one of the ways he articulated this, which really ranked with me as a church pastor, was atheist turned church pastor. I heard him say, some of us die that others might live. And I have to tell you, it didn't land well with me that day, but here I am saying it. And I came to appreciate that as a wisdom saying for those affected by addiction, is that I think it's a piece of counsel that has its place. and I could just stop there, because if that's my whole point, why don't I just quit? But some of you know me well enough to know I just, so I suffer from, I go to on and on and on. So, if there were more to be said about the subject of loss, one might run towards loss and grief theory. And there is such a thing. There's a whole, in fact, there's a discipline called thanatology that is the study of death and bereavement ministry. And it's both a theoretical and a practical, clinical sort of area of work and study. And many of my friends who were trained as chaplains are then trained as thanatologists. Hard to say, but interesting, beautiful work. And I've dipped my toe in that pool at different times in my functioning, and even for my own purposes, because my own life has not been immune from loss. And if you sort of open the book on what is there in theory of grief, it turns out it's not one, it's plural. There are varieties of theories of grief, although many people are so affected. It's like the Xerox, and for those of us old enough to remember, Xerox was, to say that Xerox was just to mean a generic copier, or to say Coke means soda or something else. And these generic, there's times when brands are equated with a particular class, and that's true of the Kubler-Ross 5-stage model of grief. It's like the Xerox or Coca-Cola of the category of grief theories. And there are a lot of people today who challenge the use of it as if it's an accurate and singularly perfect model. It's definitely not perfect. It certainly is interesting. There are grief gurus out today that are still very Kubler-Ross driven, but there are also grief gurus out there today who kind of despise the Kubler-Ross, overemphasis, and want to talk about different ways that grief is experienced without thinking about it in that particular way. And I'm not going to go through a list of different grief models. The thing I want to say to you is that, first of all, they do exist, and that I think they all suffer from a weakness, which is that they're all framed in the singular. Grief theories are basically ways of understanding how a person experiences a loss. And in fact, that's like, I remember when I was a kid, I liked math and physics, and I remember taking a course in physics where I learned about the trajectory of a projectile in the gravitational field. So this is bullets and baseballs and those kinds of things, and there's a formula. If there's no friction and there's no other sort of intervening forces, that will very accurately sort of track, given opening data, where the projectile is going to land and the shape of its curve, which many of you might remember as a parabola. And so, but you have to get from there in the real world to the, there's a field called orbital mechanics, which is what is used, it's, any of you saw the movie Hidden Figures, great movie, really interesting movie, but anyway, going from the pure Newtonian mechanics equation of the parabola to getting a little capsule to the moon, which has been in the news this week, or future projects where we've actually landed, robots on Mars. So I don't know if I could go from the parabola equation to the really complex reality of what it's like to use those things to track rockets and get them at the right place. And we can hear about launch windows and all that stuff. Anyway, grief is sort of like that. So you can have a theory about a grief event, which looks like a nice clean parabola. But grief is much messier than that. Grief is plural, not singular. And I think that, I said this to myself in the car, and when I drive up, I come to the Sunday chapel service always from a couple hours away. And it occurred to me that grief is a lens through which we could tell the story of our lives. We can tell the story of our lives through the things that we've lost, and when we will lose the things we have, right? So there's future loss. We lose everything eventually. I didn't mean to tell us, it's a terrible, tragic sidebar. My dad dies in 1982. My family is gathering for the memorial celebration, which will be at St. Patrick's in New York. But we're in this weird New York City funeral home, which I've never seen such a thing before. And I have very vivid memories of it. And my mother and my family is there, and we were having the last family visitation before we'll go to St. Patrick's for the big events. And my mother turns to the rest of us and she says, I know this is probably going to bother you, but we had an arrangement. And she pulls out of a bag that she had with her a Johnny Walker Red bottle, like a fifth of Johnny Walker Red, and then she gets her checkbook out of her wallet. And she says, money and booze. And she puts a blank check and a bottle of Johnny Walker in the casket. As if we could take it with you. And then to finish that story, like the next day, we're in a limo following the hearse to the place of my dad's burial. And my mother starts laughing. And we all were like, Mom, what are you laughing about? She said, no pen. So at the graveside, I threw a pen in the hole. So we will all lose everything eventually. And death is a curtain beyond which we cannot see. I know there are people in this room who, like me, had the professional role of comforting and consoling people at the threshold of death and bringing faith to that table. But it is faith that we bring to that table, not factual certainty in the sort of 60 Minutes documentary sense, right? Many people are certain of their faith, and I have a certainty about my own faith. But it's faith, it's not evidence-based in the classic sense, right? And so it comforts me to believe that when the end of my life comes, that death is passage, not brick wall. And yet, so I could tell you the story of my life through losses. And in some sense, that might be a skewed story of our lives, because for many people say, well, their first loss they remember is a goldfish or whatever, right? But other people have very early losses, like adoption or migration of their families in early life. I'm thinking about that. We hear about these people being displaced all the time in horrible situations around the planet. So loss hits when it hits. And we don't, I heard somebody just recently hypothesize that I said to someone that had told me their loss story, I said, gosh, you have been through an amazing amount of loss. And this person's counter to me was, yeah, I figure it's like we're all allocated the same bucket of loss, and some of us experience all of it in a short amount of time, and others of us experience it, well, I would love to believe that, except that in my experience as a chaplain, it doesn't line up. I think some of you have way more loss than others. I think that's just the truth. And I think in a certain sense that would be disrespectful of me to say to a person who has been burdened with more loss, other people really can just, they're just waiting and it'll come to them too. But ultimately these things. So I have a little outline in my head, and the next stopping point in that conversation is to say that as people sitting in the red chairs in the Caron auditorium or watching on YouTube, there is a category of loss that's personal to us. It's not only the overdose and suicide tally that is just grim in its numbers, but it's all the other losses that go with addiction and then the movement into recovery. Another way you can think about telling the story of life is the choices we make. And every time we make a choice, there's a loss, because there's the road not taken, right? And so I may be overgeneralizing what loss is about, but in a funny way, loss is like that. Loss is interwoven in the fabric of our lives. And people talk about trauma. You can't look at trauma, I think, in a certain sense, without experiencing something that's very loss-like. And you can't look at loss in some profound way without finding a lot that's traumatic. And so these categories that we create for things are helpful in studying them, but they're mushy. And the addiction-affected population knows loss in some ways that bring commonality in spite of all the difference. So at least I have something to speak into here, because I can presume that you have all seen this happen, right? You have watched a member of your family become sort of lost to you. You've watched yourself become lost to other people. You're here contemplating the hope of losing the past misery and finding something great ahead. But you will, in waking up, one of the first emotions I had in my entrance to sobriety was this incredible remorse. And yes, I had horrible things I'd done happen, but also I came to realize that one of the things I was grieving was the life I would have had I not become addicted. Because there were all these hopes for me. Oh, you're a smart kid, and you're going to go to great schools, and you're going to have this great trajectory. And, I mean, I was smuggling cocaine into the Far East with the trip that my grandmother made possible for me when I was 16 years old, I'm embarrassed to say. So I should have been caught and locked up at that time. There were tons of times I should have been caught and locked up, but there's so many outcomes I have been spared, and yet also my life was taken by addiction. And in a certain sense, choice was given back to me in 1989 because I found my way into recovery. And amazingly, since 1989, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink or a drug to get wasted. It's an amazing fact. It still bewilders and bemuses and fills me with gratitude. So, I had two other things I wanted to do. One was I wanted to pay tribute to a particular lost person in my life. And another was to talk about kind of takeaways from the reflections and from Father Bill. And the person I wanted to remember today was my oldest brother, David. David was a good bit older than me, and in a family of 5 kids, he was the oldest, and he today would have been identified as a co-occurring issues person. Late in his years, meaning like 28, I think he lived to only 31 or 32, he was diagnosed as manic depressive, which in those years was the term for what we today call bipolar. And when he went on bipolar meds, sadly, he also continued to drink and drug. And the lithium that he was taking, apparently it's a salt and it dissolves and isn't properly absorbed if you're imbibing alcohol. And so he never really got properly medicated. He did go to treatment once somewhere, but he lived as a vagrant and was kicked out of my family. I understand why my parents got to that point. I'm sure had I been the person in charge, I would have gotten to the point of setting those difficult boundaries. Some of you are sitting here in this room and you know what I'm talking about. Because there's a point at which the love that you have has been expressed with what turns out to look very much like enabling. And so you feel totally trapped by that because you have this parental primal urge to be the rescuer and helper to your progeny, and yet you come, Mike O'Tay or somebody gets in your face and you start realizing that you are caught up in a repetitive drama out of the best of intentions that may very well lead to the death of the person that you want to help live. And so all of a sudden, and that's I think where my parents got, even without ACOA or Al-Anon or anything like that, but they got to the point where like, we're done, David, we're done. And so they were done, and he was very ill, and in 1990, I want to say, he was murdered. Traveling on no resources up in the Northwest with a fellow sufferer. They had sought out this other guy's grandmother, and she had said, well, you can stay in my basement, but temporarily, and you know, she was trying to set a boundary too. And this guy shot my brother 3 times in the head. They were both incredibly intoxicated. I know he's long out of prison. I've never followed that side of the story. I've come to a great deal of peace about it in some ways, and then some days it just really hits me. So, one of the things that I think that is very tempting when we are proximal to people and when I'm lost, it may have triggered this, me telling you the David story may have triggered something in you. Like there might be a thing you want to say to me, right, that would be helpful to me. Because I think this is a natural human response. In love, we want to care for people who are suffering. But the sad thing, I learned this early on in my practice of ministry, is that usually whatever I say will be the wrong thing. Because it's not like there are no things to say, there's a ton of things to say. And I hear this all the time. I hear people want to comfort people and say, well, God needed another angel. Or maybe, maybe this, maybe that, maybe the other thing. Maybe they were being tested and, whatever. But I remember seeing somebody say God needed another angel. Somebody, and then the woman said, yeah, but I need my angel here. And as if I want to poke you in the eye or punch you in the face for your inappropriately timed comment. Yeah. And so the wise course for the chaplain is often silence, but presence. And that's a way of ministering very appropriately. In the book of Job, it's my favorite part of the Job story. Is his friends sit with him for several days, and then they can't tolerate the silence, so they start offering their answers. But let me go back to what Father Bill said. Some of us die, those who might live. When I was a kid, I learned the questions of the journalist. Do you remember they are who, what, where, when, why, how? I think those are the things that the journalist preoccupies themselves with. But there's a question that the journalist ignores for good reason, because it's what would shift journalism to editorial. I'm not going to go there today, but anyway, the question is so. Like so? The question is, what do I take from this experience? To me, it's the right question to ask in every moment of our evolving accumulation of loss experience. It's a question that's accessible to all of us. It's not an answer, but it's an alternative. It's what either inspiration, guidance, lesson, or action do I feel called to do in response to this next event in my cascading experience of life as loss? And the Tennyson poem, I thought it was Shakespeare, but then I asked Siri this morning, and Siri told me it was Tennyson the testimony. It is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. So some of us make this decision. This hurts so much, I'm done, right? I'm not going to love. I'm not going to risk. I'm not going to put myself out there because this sucks too much. Excuse me for the vernacular. But I think Tennyson is where I would want us to go. It's where Father Bill would want me to go, is to seek to love better because of those who I've cared for who have gone from our side. And I will tell you, when I have watched families who experience the worst, I think in some ways that it's bad to quantify or qualify losses, but in some level, wouldn't you agree with me, like losing a child is got to rank right up there, right? But the families that I have seen that have somehow kept putting one foot in front of the other after that particular flavor of loss almost always exhibit some form of giving back that I think is a testimony to this so and the power of the so question. Because what they decided is that in losing their beloved, they must give philanthropy. We used to have this woman, she would come, she was here not too long, but she used to come at least once a year and stand up here at the mic and tell about her beautiful son, Jimmy R., who had lost his life to this miserable illness. And that was part of her faithful response. Her answer to the so question was, I need to come to Caron and try to give back, tell the story of my boy to people who it's probably their greatest fear. So to those of you who suffer from this illness alongside with me, the thing we can do as we look to the left and right and realize that we've lost somebody is we can fight to live. Fight to stay here and be present and give to one another, to help each other stay above ground, right? And that's worth doing. It's worth doing. Some people say, oh, you won't get and stay sober unless you're doing it for yourself. And there's a truth to that. But I would also say, I'm thrilled if you're doing this to honor the memory of someone you love. Like, hey, whatever it is, or if you're a parent, you're doing it for your kids. Like, whatever, finding motivation anywhere we can to turn from the temptation, the craving, the offered coke, weed, hit, pill, paid sex worker, whatever it is that somebody like tantalizes you with because that's your particular area of weakness or concern, or a new one that you never went down the rabbit hole with. We need power, and it can come from faith, but it can come from love, it can come from grief, it can come from parenting, it can come from a variety of different connectednesses. It's in our connectedness that the power is given to us to say no. Not today, not now. And this is my hope and call, is that we would answer the invitation of the ones who have left our sight to be agents of love and care to one another, to empower recovery among those who remain. Right? That's what we should do. I think. I try to avoid the should word, but I said it. So, a rallying cry. Let us live and love.